What could possibly make a billionaire leave behind his reputation, disguise himself as a dishwasher, just to take a single bite of fried chicken and then freeze in place, unable to swallow? On a sun-drenched afternoon along B Street, Nathan Creed stood silently before the very first store he had built with his own hands, the place where a dream was born to bring his grandma Alma's fried chicken recipe to every corner of America. 18 years ago, this was just a tin-roofed kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon, black pepper, and celery seed, a flavor that Alma Creed had created not from a formula, but from memory, from the heart of a Southern woman. Now, Alma's drumstick has made its way to over 200 cities, mentioned on talk shows and financial news segments. But today there were no cameras, no suits, no assistant trailing behind, just a man in a worn khaki jacket, faded jeans, a low-brimmed baseball cap, and a silent unease he couldn't name. Nathan had once been warned by a mentor, "Don't let emotion cloud your data." But when he looked at the latest quarterly report with over 3,000 complaints and profits down nearly 20%, he knew these weren't just numbers. They were signals that something sacred was fading. He didn't need data. He needed feeling. The feeling of a man who once stood by the fryer 14 hours a day to protect the soul of a dish. And today, he came back, not as the founder, but as a stranger in search of memories in every bite of chicken. The familiar bell rang as he stepped inside. A young woman with a weary smile greeted him. Her name tag read, Ivy. "Just one?" she asked. "I heard this was the best fried chicken in Tennessee, so I drove all day to try it," Nathan replied with a playful Southern drawl. Ivy led him to a corner table and handed him the menu with tired eyes, showing no sign of recognizing him. That was fine. Nathan ordered a 3-piece combo, drumstick, wing, and breast, with mashed potatoes, collard greens, and a butter biscuit. "Sweet tea?" Ivy asked. "Double sweet," he replied, as if playing the role of his 25-year-old self. Everything looked fine. Clean tables, soft music, warm lighting. But he noticed the little things. A flickering bulb, a stain on the ceiling, a greasy, smudged menu. Alma used to say, "If the kitchen isn't bright and clean, the food will feel dull and lost." When the plate arrived, he took a deep breath, golden, crispy crust, familiar spices in the air. But the first bite made him pause. The mild heat was still there, but the aged cinnamon, the lingering basil note, gone. This wasn't the soul of Alma's drumstick. It was a close imitation, good enough to fool a first-time customer, but not the man who created it. And then, from behind the register, came a quiet voice, a whisper that would change everything. As Nathan tried to break down each layer of flavor in the piece of chicken before him, the crisp coating was still there, the slight heat still present. He suddenly realized something. The subtle sweetness of nutmeg, the smooth aroma of white pepper, all had vanished. This wasn't a small mistake, it was a deliberate substitution. He tried a bite of the breast, traditionally the hardest part of chicken to season well, but the more he ate, the clearer it became. Alma's recipe had been tampered with. It wasn't just a change in flavor, it was the absence of soul. As he set his fork back down on the plate, a conversation floated over softly from the service counter, as if fate had decided to pull back the curtain and reveal the scene behind the stage. "Mason, keep it down. If anyone hears, we're screwed." A whispered female voice. Nathan recognized it as Ivy, the server who had brought him his meal. A male voice replied, chuckling under his breath, "Who's gonna hear? Who cares? That old chicken recipe's been gone for ages. Checked my account this morning, another 20 grand. Everything's taken care of." Nathan didn't turn around. He didn't need to. Every word landed like a pinprick to his ears, piercing through his memory, and into the pride of a man who once knelt beside a fryer to create something truly meaningful. Mason Riggs, a name he had never heard, but that smug, careless tone as it spoke of money, mocking what Grandma Alma called her living legacy, sent Nathan's blood rising with each beat. And Ivy? She was the one who placed the dish before him, the one who had hesitated just enough to look into the eyes of her customer, but not once chose to reveal the truth. Now, she spoke of deception as if it were routine. Nathan lowered his hand and gently clenched the napkin on his lap, as if trying to contain the storm welling inside his chest. He understood now, this wasn't about a mistake in ingredients or a budget-cutting decision. This was betrayal, not just of him, but of everyone who once believed Alma's drumstick stood for something special. And more than anything, it was a betrayal of the woman who had created the recipe out of love, not spreadsheets. Nathan lifted his head, locking eyes with Ivy's faint smirk from behind the counter. He knew. From this moment on, dinner was over. The investigation had officially begun. When Nathan left Alma's drumstick, he didn't return to the luxury hotel his company had reserved for him. Instead, he drove straight to a roadside motel by the river, the kind with no cheerful receptionist, no card reader, just an old man who took cash through a dust-covered glass window. He rented a small room with a creaky bed and a ceiling fan that turned slowly. Inside his suitcase were no pressed dress shirts, no polished leather shoes, only a set of work clothes, a pair of steel-toe boots, and an old employee badge bearing the name Jonah Briggs, an identity he and the security team had created for situations just like this. He hung his jacket on a hook, sat on the edge of the bed, pulled out his phone, and dialed a familiar number. On the other end, a woman's voice answered, calm, sharp, and full of gravity. Lena Chow speaking. Nathan didn't bother with greetings. I need you to pull every login into the recipe database over the past 90 days. Focus on one name, Victor Hale. A brief silence followed before Lena responded slowly. Vice President of Strategy. Exactly, Nathan said, each word like a blade of steel. And don't alert anyone. I'll be back on B Street tomorrow morning. But not as the CEO. He hung up, his eyes fixed on the pale gray wall where the paint had peeled with age. Memories surged like an undercurrent. At 23, he once slept beneath the kitchen counter of that first store, the same place where Grandma Alma would soothe his worries with lullabies before they opened each morning. Now, he was sleeping in a room no one knew, ready once again to start from the very bottom, as the night shift dishwasher. But this time, it wasn't to build. It was to expose. Before turning off the light, he pulled out an old photo. Alma smiling beside a bubbling fryer. He gently touched the edge of the picture with his fingertip and whispered like a vow, I won't let anyone take away what you left behind. I swear it. And in that still moment, the man who once signed million-dollar contracts felt a strange sense of peace, because he knew to truly see who was dirtying the kitchen, he would have to step into the grease himself, starting tomorrow. Jonah Briggs' first shift began at 3 in the afternoon, in the sweltering air tinged with the murky scent of fryer oil left over from lunch. No one paid attention to the middle-aged man in a worn flannel shirt, scuffed work boots, and eyes that held a quiet humility mixed with a hint of unease. Kent Wallace, the branch manager, gave only a passing glance at the fake resume before waving him through with a shrug. Just don't spill food on the customers. No interview, no questions, no concern for background. Nathan gave a faint smile, exactly as he had hoped. Within an hour, Jonah Briggs was officially absorbed into the invisible crew, the behind-the-scenes team who scrubbed hundreds of plastic trays, wiped grease from the floor, and pried leftover meals from the dishwasher's arms. No one asked where he came from. No one questioned why a middle-aged man was working a job that paid $11 an hour with no benefits. That was perfect, because from the lowest position, he began to observe. And what he witnessed went far beyond disappointment. Mason Riggs, the man who had mentioned the money transfer just days before, wasn't just an arrogant sous chef. He controlled the entire supply stream. Unlabeled spice containers and untraceable sacks of flour were quietly replacing the officially sanctioned ingredients, the flour mix distributed only through the secure headquarters supply chain. Ivy was different, quick on her feet, but frequently skipped the dish check process to speed up service and push table turnover. Nathan noted that. But what truly rattled him was the look in Luis's eyes, the quiet, soft-spoken stockroom worker, every time Kent Wallace entered the storage area. The tension, the way Luis subtly stepped back, his fingers instinctively curling into a fist. All signs of a fear with no name. Each evening, after his shift, Nathan returned to the motel and typed out detailed reports for Lena Chow. With each passing day, the picture became clearer. Crimson Hen, their old rival, hadn't just gotten the recipe. They had the entire supply chain map, delivery schedules, and expansion data. But to prove it, Nathan needed more. Something irrefutable. And he knew it was getting closer with every shift, every overheard word, right inside the very kitchen he once called home. It was a quiet Thursday night, not too crowded, but inside the restaurant, the temperature seemed to rise with the whispers that floated through the scent of boiling oil. Nathan was scrubbing the last fryer basket when Mason's voice drifted from the break room in the back, not loud but clear enough for someone silently standing nearby. Victor said push the next shipment to Crimson Hen early. He's afraid HQ is starting to question the login from last month. We need to wrap this up before the audit hits. Kent responded in a low voice tinged with urgency. And that new guy, Jonah, he watches everything. I bet he's not just some regular dude. A heavy silence fell. Nathan didn't breathe. A chill crawled up his spine. In that moment, he knew that even the slightest misstep could bring down everything he had carefully hidden, but he also knew this was the final piece. Not only was Victor Hale the vice president of strategy named directly, but there was confirmation. Crimson Hen was receiving the recipe, distribution intel, and everything from people wearing Alma's drumstick uniforms. That night, after the shift ended, he took off his apron slowly, like a worn-out worker, but inside his head, a plan was already forming. He returned to the break room where Mason and Kent usually gathered after hours and discreetly installed a tiny hidden camera under the shelf where they kept their drinks and phones. On his way back to the motel, Nathan texted Lena a single sentence. Everything is moving. Be ready. In the dimly lit room, he looked at his hands in the mirror, fingers red from detergent, rough from fryer oil, aching from standing at the sink all day. These were the same hands that had signed multi-million-dollar contracts, had delivered speeches at financial summits in New York. And now, once again, they were soaked in grease. But not to build a brand, this time to cleanse rot from the inside. Nathan smiled, because only by stepping into the grime could he clearly see who was truly dirty. And within the very kitchen he had built on faith, he had begun to see every real face emerge. Saturday, typically the busiest evening at the B Street location, carried an unusually quiet air. The guests were sparse, mostly older locals. Employees moved with weariness and caution. Jonah Briggs, the nameless dishwasher, remained at the cleaning station, ears tuned to every faint sound, eyes scanning every expression on his co-workers' faces. But tonight, his gaze lingered longer somewhere else, on Ivy Tran. Unlike Mason with his arrogance or Kent with his cold control, Ivy was a contradiction. She was never loud, never boastful, worked fast, sometimes too fast, but never seemed lazy. What Nathan couldn't ignore was her eyes. In unguarded moments, Ivy's gaze would drift into empty space as if weighing something heavy. That night, he found a chance when she was counting sauce trays in the supply room. He stepped in, gently setting a box beside her, keeping his tone steady. "You all right?" Ivy paused, turned, forcing a faint smile. "Me? Yeah, just tired." Nathan bent down, pretending to arrange the sauces while subtly placing the recording device Lena had handed him that morning. "Heard you've been here longer than Kent. You must have seen a lot change." Ivy pressed her lips together, head lowered, silent for a few seconds before sighing. "Jonah, what do you think about the chicken here lately?" Nathan looked up, their eyes met. "It's not Alma's drumstick anymore." Ivy gave a sad smile. "I used to love this place. Learned how to stack biscuits so they wouldn't break. Mixed the greens just right, but now I feel like I'm just acting." Her voice dropped. "Mason made me use that substitute spice, At first I thought it was something new from HQ, but then I saw the invoices from a supplier I'd never heard of. I pushed back. Kent said if I didn't follow orders, they'd cut my hours, and I've got my mom's hospital bills to think about. Nathan slowly nodded. Did you know the recipe's been sent to Crimson Hen? Ivy flinched, eyes wide. No, I thought it was just about saving costs. Nathan looked into her. They're selling the whole model, the supply chain, and they're using people like you to legitimize it. Ivy stepped back, as if the floor beneath her had cracked open. I've been helping destroy it without even knowing. A long silence followed. Nathan stepped closer, voice softening. I'm not here to blame. I need to know. Are you willing to help me expose the truth? For the first time, Ivy looked directly at him, as if trying to see through the mask of someone named Jonah. And then, the back door swung open. Kent Wallace stood there, gaze sharp like a blade. Looks like you two are having quite the private chat, huh? Without waiting for an answer, he gave a cold smirk. Jonah, table 7 spilled sweet tea. Go clean it up. As Nathan silently walked past him, his shoulder brushed Kent's arm. Kent gave a subtle squeeze, just enough to send a warning. And deep in Nathan's gut, one thing had never been clearer. The disguise was beginning to crack. And while Ivy might be the key to unlocking the truth, Kent would be the first to try and destroy it. The next morning, the air in B Street's kitchen was as thick as congealed grease. Nathan walked in with his usual quiet stride, but this time he could feel the scrutinizing eyes from all directions. Ivy avoided looking at him. Mason cast wary glances from the side. Kent stood like a stage director, seemingly waiting for the curtain to fall on the final act. But what made Nathan stop were the two unfamiliar figures who appeared at the entrance. One man in a charcoal gray suit with sharp eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses, and beside him, a tall, cold figure in a perfectly pressed navy blue suit, a crimson hen lapel pin gleaming just beneath the collar. In the flickering light from the ceiling bulb, Nathan recognized him immediately. Victor Hale, once a trusted partner of Alma, the man who used to call Nathan his honorary nephew. Now he walked into Alma's Drumsticks kitchen as if there had never been a betrayal, as if memory could be erased with a new suit and a stack of dishonest contracts. "Good morning," said the man with glasses first, his voice smooth. "I'm Lawrence Wynn, strategic representative from Crimson Hen, and this is Mr. Victor Hale, Vice President of Strategy. We're just dropping by to review a few expansion metrics, strictly internal." Nathan felt the veins in his neck tighten. His heart pounded like a drum, but he didn't flinch. He couldn't afford to, because right now, he was Jonah, not Nathan Creed. When Victor walked past, his gaze swept over him without the slightest sign of recognition. No memory, no connection. Just the cold indifference of a man who once felt like a brother, but now played cleanup for a corporate invasion. Nathan quickly pulled out his phone and texted Lena, "They're here. Call legal. Call the police. Call everyone." But before he could turn away, Kent Wallace stepped forward, dragged a metal chair into the center of the kitchen, and slapped it twice. "Everyone gather around. Quick team meeting." Ivy moved close to Nathan, her breath trembling as she whispered, "Last night, they wiped all backup camera footage." Nathan gave a small nod. This was no longer a quiet investigation. This was war. And time was running out. In the moment of stillness, as the kitchen held its breath, Kent stood at the center of the room like a director preparing for the final act. His eyes swept across the team, a forced smile on his lips masking his usual air of control. "Everyone," he said, "we're all here. I want to emphasize the spirit of cooperation in our brand expansion efforts, alongside our strategic partner." Lawrence from Crimson Hen nodded, his gaze scanning the room like a map without emotion. Victor Hale remained silent, arms folded, face as cold and unyielding as stone, not a flicker of memory from the years beside Alma. Nathan knew that if he let them speak any longer, if he allowed this charade to continue for even a minute, the truth would be replaced, the legacy rewritten, trust erased. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. One decisive movement, He removed the baseball cap, pulled off his glasses, and peeled away the adhesive that covered his graying hair, like ripping off the mask after a performance that had gone on far too long. The kitchen froze. Ivy gasped. Mason looked as if he'd been slapped. Kent took half a step back. But Victor, he didn't blink, as if he'd always suspected but never expected the reveal to come so soon. "I'm Nathan Creed." His voice rang out, deep and steady like a war drum. "And this is the kitchen where my grandmother, Alma Creed, once cooked the first batch of fried chicken with love, not greed." He raised his phone and played a recording. Mason and Kent's voices echoed through the room, their shady conversations about deleting files, transferring recipes to Crimson Hen, and implicating Victor Hale. All of it, clear and undeniable. Victor stepped forward, his tone cold. "Nathan, this is an internal matter. You're making a scene. Everything can be resolved internally." "Internally?" Nathan cut in, his stare sharp as a blade. "You sold the soul of this brand. You betrayed my grandmother, you betrayed me, and you betrayed people like Ivy, who believed this place stood for something." He tapped another file, an email extracted from a mirrored server Lena had secured earlier. The subject line appeared, "Operation Orange Peel." Its contents detailed the approved transfer of proprietary recipes, a planned market takeover in the Southeast, and a directive to release internal data before the weekend. Lawrence quickly interjected, "You had no right to record that." "I have every right to protect what my grandmother left behind," Nathan replied, each word like a hammer striking iron. Just then, the back door swung open. Lena Chow entered with 2 police officers and Alma's Drumsticks legal team. The officers received the documents from Lena, and the charges were read aloud in the hushed kitchen. Theft of intellectual property, sabotage of supply chain, unauthorized system access. Kent was the first to be handcuffed, thrashing and shouting. Mason stood frozen. Victor pointed a finger at Nathan. "You'd be nothing without me. Let's see how long you last." Nathan stepped closer, his voice colder than steel. "My grandmother used to say, 'A strategist without loyalty is just a bottomless pan.' You taught me a painful lesson, but unfortunately for you, I'm a fast learner." As Victor was led away, Ivy remained in place, her eyes wet but no longer afraid. Nathan looked around the kitchen. No sound of frying oil, no clatter of knives or cutting boards, only the stillness after a storm. And he knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. 1 month after the incident at the B Street branch, as news of the internal scandal gradually faded from the headlines, the headquarters of Alma's Drumstick lit up before dawn. It wasn't to host a shareholder meeting or launch a new product, but to welcome something rare in the world of business, a ceremony of restoration. In the grand hall once used for strategic planning, chairs were arranged in long rows facing a low wooden stage. There were no investors in sight, no embellished media coverage, only those who had quietly sustained the company's heartbeat, longtime store employees, logistics crew, kitchen leads, and in the front row sat Ivy Tran. She sat in silence, her eyes still reflecting remnants of regret, but steadier than ever. Nathan stepped onto the stage without a tie and without a scripted speech. He held the microphone, looking out not for applause, but for the eyes of those who had once believed. "A few weeks ago," he began, "we hit rock bottom. Not because our revenue dropped, but because we let greed distort what mattered most, trust." He pressed a button on the remote, and behind him appeared a restored photograph of Alma Creed, gray-haired, wearing a brown floral blouse, holding a wooden spoon beside a pan of oil blazing with golden light. This isn't just the woman who created a chicken recipe worth millions. She's the one who taught me that food isn't just to fill stomachs, but to remind people of what is right, what is kind. A thin curtain was drawn to the side, revealing an old wooden table and the original cast-iron pot, the first artifact of Alma's Drumstick. On it was a freshly fried serving of chicken, crisp golden crust, the aroma of black pepper, celery seed, basil, and a sweet heat like a greeting from the deep south. Nathan lifted the plate with both hands as if raising a soul back to life. "I present to you Grandma Alma's legacy chicken, The only fried chicken that will be served across our entire system starting today. No one is allowed to alter the recipe. Not even me. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous like a PR stunt, but warm, sustained, and real. But Nathan didn't stop there. He invited Ivy to join him on stage. She hesitated, then stood up amidst sympathetic glances. He said, "She is the reason the truth came to light, and instead of punishment, we chose to empower someone who knew when to stop." The room fell silent. From today forward, Ivy Tran will serve as director of the Employee Support Program, an initiative to help those in financial hardship so they no longer have to sacrifice integrity just to get by. Ivy said nothing. She simply bowed her head, her hand clenched tightly, a silent gratitude. But the revival of a spirit had already spoken for her. The ceremony wasn't over yet when Nathan took the microphone once more, his eyes slowly scanning the room, not to summon applause, but to reconnect with the eyes that once lost faith and were now beginning to glow again. "Today," he said, "we've restored the original chicken. But the soul of Alma's drumstick isn't in the recipe. It lives in how we act when no one's watching." A short pause, then he continued, "And so, I'm announcing a new program starting next quarter, called From the Fryer Up. Under this initiative, every member of leadership, no exceptions, will be required to work 1 week each quarter at a random location. No titles, no privileges." A ripple of murmurs swept the room. Some eyes widened in surprise, but most, especially those in kitchen uniforms, began to lift their heads. "Because no one truly understands their company," Nathan said, his voice sharpening, "until they've scrubbed a grease-stained floor, served a grumpy old lady, or washed trays during the dinner rush." He smiled, not the smile of a triumphant CEO, but the smile of a man who had just reclaimed something he thought he had lost. The entire room rose to their feet, not out of admiration, but out of solidarity. In that moment, they were no longer staff, executives, or chefs. They were guardians of something worth keeping. That night, after everyone had left, Nathan stood alone in Alma's original kitchen, now preserved as a small museum. On the wall hung an old handwritten letter, framed in chipped wood. He stepped closer, gently touching the faded words. "You may fail 1,000 times, but if you hold on to what's right even once, I'll be proud." The light from the window cast across his face. No longer a CEO, no longer a public figure, just a grandson bowing before a promise never forgotten. Outside, the headquarters sign glowed softly, its colors shifting in the night. A new line appeared, not flashy, not crafted for marketing. Alma's drumstick, cooked with heart, served with loyalty. And this time, no one could take that away. No rival brand, no rogue strategist, no system could strip a legacy protected by the very heart that created it. Because in business, the real recipe for success isn't written on paper. It's found in how we protect what's right, especially when no one is watching. And if you too believe some values can never be replaced, remember these 3 words: guard the recipe. In the business world, where profit often overshadows core values, the story of Nathan Creed stands as proof that a brand is not built through marketing campaigns, but through memory, dignity, and loyalty. When a leader is willing to step down to the lowest level, not to control, but to listen, to observe, to empathize, then it is no longer just a role of management. It becomes an act of preserving identity. A legacy, if not protected by the one who created it, will soon be redefined by someone else. And sometimes, to guard a recipe, one must be willing to step back into the kitchen, even if those hands were once used to sign million-dollar contracts. If you believe there are still things that should never be traded away, even in a fiercely competitive world, hit like to help spread this spirit. Subscribe so you won't miss stories that rekindle true values. And don't forget to leave a comment with the words, "Guard the recipe," if you too believe that loyalty and kindness are still worth protecting.